Alrighty, welcome back everybody. This is Michael, and this is a new tutorial on my rubble wall building technique. If you saw my previous episode of this, I was using a slightly different method to create kind of a structural wall for these rubble blocks to be able to attach to. This is the first time you see it. Basically, what I'm doing is I'm basically building walls using these really great rubble blocks that TFP have now included in the game. And if you weren't aware, these particular blocks do have advanced rotations, so you can rotate them in any orientation. And they've got some really nice textures and features on the back sides that would basically makes them really nice, very distressed remnant type walls. So I started playing around with these in order to basically build remnant structures that could be utilized as POIs. Gives it a much more organic look and much more realistic, has a greater visual impact. If you watched my previous episode, you'll note that I utilized these little half narrow bars or pillars as my structural support, and these work great. They're strong, but one thing about these blocks is they have very few hit points. They only have like something like 200 hit points each, I think. Let's take a real quick look here. Yeah, only 2 hit points each, so they get destroyed relatively easy if a zombie starts pounding on them, and it can expose your underlying structure. And one thing that's kind of my pet peeve is not having repeating patterns that kind of make it look definitely artificial. So I had realized that they do have something that actually would work really well and blends in well, and that's these rebar blocks. You can kind of see here they're kind of a randomish bent looking thing, and you know, if this is inside your structural wall and they knock out these actually blend in a lot better. And what I usually end up doing, because they do have this shiny steel texture on them, I'll go ahead and paint these a rust color so they blend in a lot better, and you can build your structural lattice out of those. If you're not familiar with how the what it's called, the admin block replacement tool, it is in your admin tools. What this allows you to do is to basically replace all of the blocks that you have with another block to include its texture. But what I usually, since I'm going to be doing this from the ground up, I'm going to start off with an already texturized version of this. So once you've actually gotten a block how you want it to look painted wise or whatever, all you have to do is, as long as you've got an empty slot in your tool button, you say I have several on there, if you click down on your scroll wheel, your middle mouse button, what that will do is create a duplicate of what you're pointing at. So I'm going to click my scroll wheel here, and you see down here I've got this new block, and you see it's got a little paintbrush in here that indicates that this is basically a painted clone. So I'm going to be using that as my I'm going to be using that as my my building blocks. Now there's a couple ways you can do this. This very simple way to build this wall is to simply use your Z key to select an area. I'm just going to create a line here. Hit Z again to select the second part, and then using your Shift G keys, you will select the top handle there, drag it up however high you want, and having whatever block you want to put in there in your hand. So right now I have the rebar. You hit the L button on your keyboard, and it'll fill that selection with that block. Now, this is basically going to put them all in the same orientation, and as I mentioned before, I really don't like repeating patterns. So again, if the zombies do knock out the rubble blocks, you're going to start seeing this, and to me, this is kind of it kind of takes you out of the immersion. So I'm going to hit my J key to get rid of that. So what I ended up doing is I went ahead and kind of created my own little mini POI here. Yeah, let me go ahead and pull this up. That I'm going to load to my clipboard, and you can see here what I've done is I've done random rotations and orientations of this rebar, so I have kind of a starting point of where I want this to be utilized. So when you first bring it in, if you already have a Z selection somewhere, it's going to orient itself to that. Since I didn't put up in the air, so all I have to do is hit my G key and bring this down to ground level to right there, and then hit my Control V key to actually place it in the scene here. So now I have my structure. This is very solid. This is steel. And I think I used a different paint color. I think I used the concrete. You can use whatever texture you want. And now I can start placing these blocks. So right now this thing is very solid. One thing about these blocks here is that even though they have a fairly large hitbox, so if I shoot this anywhere on here, it's going to destroy it. But when it comes to structural integrity, there's really only one block in here. If you see this it kind of jumps around, but it kind of glitches in and out. The only real structural place is, I think on this one, is in this area. This one is kind of in the middle. If I go ahead and bring one of these up, let me orient this back kind of towards its normal orientation here. You see that green box there? That is the one place where there is structural integrity for these blocks. So if I stack something like that and I put this over here onto the side, even though it looks like it's physically connected, it is not. So if I bring this into a world and if you interact with this, you jump on it or whatever, this is actually going to collapse and break apart. So this does not have any kind of structural integrity. So that's why I started using this lattice system here to give structural integrity to these walls. So basically, once you've got your rebar wall all set up, what you want to do is go ahead and orient your rubble blocks the way you want to. And I like using the bottom side kind of as the surface of my wall, because it kind of gives you almost like a building that had been in a nuclear blast and it's partially melted and organic looking. So you see it's kind of butting up against this wall. Some places it's slipping through the holes that are there, because it's not a tight lattice. But I want to get it so where it's in a position where it's right in front of it. And then holding my shift key down will basically mean I'm replacing that one green block that's part of the rubble, replacing the rebar with that. So holding my shift key down, I can kind of get my orientation here, hold my shift key down, and I'm replacing that one rebar block. So that has structural integrity, and all it did is replace that one rebar block, and that's what I want to do with all of these. So I'm just going to go ahead and randomly kind of put these in here. You'll pop them in wherever you want, and try to be as organic as possible. Do some rotations. Again, I'll do my shift right click. Sometimes you'll accidentally replace one of the blocks you already had replaced, but you just kind of have to go back and forth and fill in the gaps as you go. And again, it's just want to kind of reorient, make sure that wherever you're putting it, you do have that green highlight box there. Otherwise it's just, like if I'm right here, it's not really connecting to anything. So I'm going to put these in again, a fairly random place, and then I can use any one of these. So basically these three main rubble blocks that work well. You have the long brick, you have the standard brick, and then you have this kind of concrete rubble one. This one is a little funky on how it attaches, and I'll show you that as we go through that. And so I'm just going to continue on filling this in using these rubble blocks here. On the one side, and again we're just going to do our shift left click and do some reorientation, shift left click, and you see that one kind of replaced one I already had in there. Again, that's no worry, because again you try to be as random as possible with this sort of stuff. Now here is that kind of concrete, broken concrete piles here. So if I shift click in there, it sometimes does it on the back side. It's kind of weird, but it will still be structurally sound. You just kind of have to be a little more accepting. You see that that green box is more along the top as opposed to the bottom. So now this will connect. If you see, I've got the rebar right here. this will connect to the rebar in front. So if I do want it to be, as opposed to kind of being in that back area, I can connect it to the front of that that rebar structure, and it will be structurally sound. So once you've got this kind of how you want on one side, you can go ahead and start working on the other side. Now, basically, this whole thing, even though I'm putting walls on both sides, technically this entire wall is only one block thick. It's just that if you look on here, these bottom portions, what would normally be the bottom, protrudes off to one side. So they're more like 1.5 blocks wide when you have them in these kind of horizontal orientations. Which also adds a neat little trick that you can do that I'll cover a little bit later on. So I'm going to go ahead and work on this side to, place these in kind of random locations. You'll more than likely accidentally replace something on the other side. See, I accidentally replaced that one, but you just need to kind of go back and forth to fill in as much as you want. And it's nice to kind of have these gaps in it like that, because that really kind of adds to the destroyed remnant look to it. So I'm going to continue on laying this out, and I will come back on once I've got it how I like it. Okay, so that's a kind of a good starting point, and again, you can just play around with this to get what you want. Again, there's going to be a lot of kind of replacement and whatnot, so you just kind of have to keep going back and forth until you get the look that you're going for. So I'm just going to kind of leave that at this for now. So this is basically a very structurally sound wall, because I have that lattice of underlying rebar in there, and I've been replacing individual blocks of that with these larger pieces, and they do overlap really nicely, so you can get a really nice kind of worn remnant type look to it. Let's see if I can slip one more in there to kind of fill that gap. Looks really nice. I really like it. Now, what I like to do is to include some that do not have a structural integrity, because as you know, I'll be setting this up so people can leap up on here, kind of get up here, have some things that overhang. So I do like having occasional ones that might actually collapse on them. So basically all you have to do is just put one without it being really attached to anything. And this is something you're just going to have to play around with. It does take a while to kind of get it oriented to what you want to do. Now you can also have these protrude through. So say for instance, I have it oriented like this. I can basically do the same thing. I still want to use my shift left button mouse click to place it in there, and I'm going to try to find a good location and place it in there. And now I have kind of a shelf that people can, you can create a stair step structure for people to be able to leap up and get up to the top of the wall. Orient one like this, and say I put one down here. This one's actually sitting on the ground, and I put another one. Sometimes they disappear on you when you're trying to lay it in, and it's going to replace other blocks, but that's okay. Again, it's a kind of a experiment as you go type sort of thing. Let me orient that on the other side where it's a little bit wider there, so there's something that they can actually jump onto. So now I've got something where a player can actually leap up and work their way up, and you can use other blocks as well. One thing I also like doing for something like this where I wanted them to be able to jump up, I will use these rebars, and I will do a advanced rotation on these as well. So I kind of have them sticking out horizontally, and because I do have that lattice of rebar on the inside, this is going to attach to that without any problems. So now if I want to have something up here, I now have something that they can actually leap up onto in order to get up to a next level. It will be difficult, but that's part of the part of the challenge is for them to find a good pathway to get to where you want them to go, whether there's loot up here or there's zombies and whatnot. So speaking of zombies, placing zombies of these can be problematic. As I mentioned, there's really only that one little block there that has structural integrity. And if you're trying to place a sleeper down and it's not on that one spot, so say if I put him right here like this, where his feet are semi-embedded into the concrete, he will not be able to spawn. He won't spawn in at all. So you either have to get him placed specifically on the one block, which is sometimes hard to find, like this one right here. Alternatively, what I have ended up doing is, if you saw one of my previous episodes where I did the hidden noise trap technique, this is a block that's called, let me get it up here, Garbage Decor 3. And this is basically a noise trap. But the nice thing about it is that it is invisible from the bottom side. So you can kind of see it's got the broken glass look up there. But if we look at it from the bottom, it is invisible. So what I end up doing is putting this in advanced rotation until I get that glass upside down. And now I can place this on here. Now, again, this does not have structural integrity, but it's enough for the zombie to be able to spawn into. And generally what happens, I think I got him right there. Generally what happens is when you enter an area and your sleeper starts spawning in, he will spawn in, but because this is not structurally sound, because it's not sitting on anything solid, it will disintegrate and he will drop down and land on top of the stone. So you're not going to see him, floating up in the air. He will have eventually drop it down. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but most cases they do drop down without any problems. Same thing applies. You can kind of put them up in these notches here, but you kind of have to be careful to make sure that their feet are clear, because that's really kind of their spawn point is the base of their feet. So if their feet are embedded, like if I put him right here, he's probably not going to spawn in well. If I put him somewhere like here where his feet are clear, he's more likely standing on one of those rebar lattices on there. There's a better chance for him spawning in. And this applies for any of the sleepers. Your animals a little more trickier, especially the big ones like the bears or the wolves, because they kind of have their single block that you have to make sure is in the right place. You can also kind of tuck these guys in. Let's give me a sleeper that is lying down. You can kind of tuck them underneath. So you see here I've got kind of a gap under there. You can sometimes get them to tuck inside. Sometimes they will glitch out. So like when they stand up, if it's too short for them, they'll kind of go into that arm spreading jittery type motion. But you do want to be careful of putting them like right up against. If I can get a spot here, it's getting tricky. So this right here, he may not spawn in because he is partially inside that block. It's just one of the things you're going to have to just keep experimenting with, just to make sure that all of your potential sleepers are going to be able to spawn in. So that's kind of the real nuts and bolts on how to do these structural rubble walls. I do think they create a really interesting visual impact. It's much more organic than using your regular builder blocks. These look great in the wasteland biome, where you may have had a nuclear blast or whatever, and these structures are partially melted. If you see right here, I put that guy in here like this, he's not going to spawn in at all. It just won't work. So you do have to be careful. Again, utilize these little noise trap thingies in here for them to stand on when they spawn in. Same thing applies to loot. Say for instance, I have a crate or something. Crates tend to be not as much of a problem. One thing you do have to be careful. I like to do the book helper. Let me see if I can find that one here. Let's one of these ones right here. So these are really cool because they do orient themselves to the slope they're on. So if I place this, say, right here, it will move itself up to the surface. However, this is still not considered stable. So if you brush up against it or a zombie walks on it, there's a good chance it'll get knocked off and self-destruct. So your good loot, you want to make sure also has a good stable surface, or in a place where it's not going to be disturbed. It is kind of, it's kind of evil, but a little bit funny. If you do have some loot that is tucked in a place like this, and your player comes by and actually walks across it and destroys it, there's a little bit of frustration there. But it is one of those things where you kind of have a lesson learned. Okay, if you have something like this, you want to make sure you loot it before you go by it, just to be sure that you pick it up without any issues. So again, this is a real kind of quick and dirty updated tutorial on how to do these Rubble walls. If you have any comments or suggestions, please let me know. I am open to any kind of input or criticisms. So I'd like to thank you all for joining me, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care.